just to get things started, it's a pleasure to have you talking with me today. It means so much to me. I know I expressed that to you over email, but just for me personally, it means a lot to see another Black designer, landscape architect, and be able to talk with them. So that's just a little bit about why this is important to me. But I want to get into you and about your career a little bit. And you're in Sasaki, I know, but could you just tell us a little bit about where you're located and what you do and kind of how you got started?
Hi, I'm Breeze Outlaw. My pronouns are they, them, Zer. I am located in Boston. I work at Sasaki. I've been working there for the last almost 3.5 years now. And I mostly work on public projects in the public realm. That includes parks, streetscapes, things of that nature, as well as some planning projects and like large scale planning strategy projects. A lot of my work, differ from different sector, whether or not that's public or private. One of the things that I'm trying to do within my own practice is be aware of the equity factor within the work that I do, making sure that I'm, as a designer, being conscious of the impact that the work that I'm doing has on the people that will be using the space, or what that space perpetuates in the sense of either equity versus harm. And a lot of my work, I try to be conscious of that to make sure that the spaces that we are creating or the policies or planning that we're doing has an equitable and just impact on people overall, particularly marginalized communities and BIPOC communities.
Yeah, so I want to get more into your career a little bit later, but first I want to ask, what was your career before your career, and what made you get into landscape architecture, and why NC State?
So I started, graduated from high school. I started at UNC Greensboro, which is, in Greensboro, about 1.5 hours away from NC State. And I was majoring in psychology. And at the time, I was the first person in my family to go to college, so that I didn't know what majors look like or the whole trajectory of deciding what your major is or whether or not that's the work you do for the rest of your life. I had no idea how to navigate that. So, but quickly when I got into my psychology classes, I was not interested in it. It was, first day of class, I'm like, this is not for me. I need to figure something else out. And I always had an interest in art and drawing and sketching. I had an interest in it, but I also had like a hate-love thing, right? And, how do you try to navigate that and make it work for you? And after, contemplating on what direction I wanted to do, I did fine arts for a year, and then I took an art history class, and architecture was a topic of that day. And at this moment, I don't think I've ever heard the term architecture or even thought about architecture. And I was completely fascinated and needed to know more. Unfortunately, UNC Greensboro did not have an accredited program for architecture. And so because I am from Raleigh, and I was going back and forth to Raleigh every weekend, I, got all of my portfolio materials together and applied for the architecture, the Bachelor of Environmental Design Architecture program. And, was very nervous about that because I'm hearing all these stats about the number of people that get in and things like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it. And come to find out, I made it. So I was accepted. I did a architecture program for 4 years, and navigating that was very much odd because here again, I'm the first to go to college in my family. I have no design background other than a couple of art classes in high school. I have no architecture mentors. I'm being thrown into this environment where these terminologies and these ways of thinking are foreign to me. And so I'm trying to keep up, I was successful in making it through the program. And at that point, I was unsure about architecture, the pressure, the competitiveness, the nature in which we're being taught, the topics, the precedent images that we're being told to instill in our own design, own design philosophies didn't align with my own human philosophy. I didn't see myself at all. But so I ended up taking a year off after that. And really trying to figure out what was next. I didn't know what was next. I did have a passion for architecture and design, but I didn't know how I fit in it. And then, after a while, after that year, I went back and got the Bachelor of Architecture, which is a 1-year accelerated program. And that was super intense, right? You're building models, you're really a fast pace, but I'm keeping up barely. Because at this time I'm also working. And after completing that, at this point, I think the economy was just like out of whack. And so what I ended up doing was applying for the Masters of Architecture program just because, why not? Mm-hmm. But then my advisor was like, have you thought about landscape architecture? And I was like, no. I had took a small landscape architecture studio my senior year, and was pretty good at it, but didn't think much of it. And so I quickly switched and got into the MLA program, where I was able to really start to challenge myself as a student in the sense of what it is that I really wanted to get out of design. How can I actually see myself in design? And still through the curriculum at that time, I didn't see myself in a lot of the work, except for Kofi. Kofi was like there. I was absorbing everything that Kofi was throwing, was teaching. And, that led me to my final project to start to think about how we can start to, look at neighborhoods and invest the infrastructure that is needed to make a neighborhood a part of the future, but also how you do that in a way that starts to preserve that culture integrity. And so I went on that journey, and I'm still on that journey. And this is honestly, that is the start of where I'm at right now, trying to figure that out, refining that as I get more into the profession and like understanding the practicalities of those things. So that was a long story to where I'm at.
Yeah, but it's a good story because it actually can relate a lot. It sounds a lot like mine. I got into college and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I kept switching majors, and now I'm here. But speaking of that, I feel like in the Black community, we're taught that in order to make it out, it's either become a professional athlete, a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever. But usually you don't hear landscape architect or urban planner. You don't hear stuff like that. So what is something or some advice that you could give to the youth out there of how we can inspire them in a way to pursue this profession?
That's a good question. For me, one of the reasons why I was drawn to landscape architecture, but also design in general, and kept with it, is because of the many factors or many systems that are connected to landscape architecture, and the potential for the influence on the built environment and how that ripples to people and the way we live and quality of life. So I think when it comes to encouraging youth to be inspired by landscape architecture or even gain an interest in landscape architecture, for me, it's about the everyday experience. How can you start to manifest a level of gratitude in existing, right? I think landscape architecture is definitely an avenue where you can start to be influential to the spaces that you live.
So I want to know kind of what it's like to be a Black landscape architect at your firm, and kind of you spoken a little bit earlier, but what it was like at NC State.
Well, at NC State, I think, I spent almost 10 years at NC State just because I was so much drawn to the community. Looking back, there probably would have been some opportunities where more support would have been appreciate it, but also like to get that support, you got to know what support you need. And at that time I was still, trying to keep my head above water to understand where I was going, what I was doing, and not necessarily understanding fully what I needed. But what I got the support that I did get is valuable, and brings me where I'm at today. Because I was able to flourish in leadership, right? And bringing that leadership to where I'm at now at Sasaki has been somewhat of a challenge because, the landscape profession is a big world. I mean, working as an adult is a big world, right? And so you have to shift that level of leadership to be able to manage. And Sasaki, when I went there, was a large firm. Plus, I'm moving to Boston from North Carolina by myself, right? So that's a shocker. And so I find myself in this environment at Sasaki, and Sasaki has its own culture, right? And you're trying to understand this culture, and you're trying to find yourself and where you fit in, so you can find your groove in a way to contribute to what's happening, right? And for me, in the very beginning of my experience at Sasaki was good in the sense of me trying to get, my stand, like fill the ground. And then it came to a point where I guess in some ways my relationship with design was coming back up in the sense of where do I fit? Like, I'm not seeing myself. Projects weren't reflective of my own values. And that was frustrating because, as an entry level designer, there's always this joke about, and at least in architecture, that you will always be doing toilets. Like, don't expect to be doing anything grand and pretty. Like, your first few years, don't expect it. And I challenged this assumption. I'm like, why? At what point am I going to learn the skill sets and the leadership skills to be the best landscape architect that I need to be? And from there, I started to, at some point, I spoke up for myself. I'm like, my desk is not in the right spot. I feel like I need to be in this position in the office to be within the mix of all the folks that are being looked at for their thought leadership for these projects that I'm interested in on these small and big scales, but like the stuff that I'm into, like, put me over there. And then I need this type of support because I want to be licensed one day. So I need to do these types of projects. And so that's what I did. And from there, I've built onto that momentum of advocating for myself. And from that, I've had other folks within the firm start to advocate for me.
Yeah, and you spoke about speaking up for yourself and being a leader. And I feel like you're doing a very good job, especially since I've been kind of researching you a little bit. And you're a co-founder of Blackscapes and Designing While Black. Can you just explain what that means and what that represents to you and those?
Yeah, I think with Blackscapes, my best friend, Corey Dodd, who was in the MLA program with me at NC State, it was for the two of us really wanted to figure out a way to express the contributions of Black people to built environments. Because, we've learned a lot about how others have contributed to the built environments, and a lot of that has been, those contributions have caused harm, and they're oppressive, and they have become indoctrinated within the pedagogy of how design is done. And so what we wanted to do was highlight moments of joy and celebration in which Black people have built spaces for thriving, or for existing, celebrating the people who have built spaces that are not quote unquote landscape architects because they don't have the education and the licensure, right? But yet they build their spaces. So for us, that is the main goal for that. And within that, building on that and just celebrating that it's really the complete counterpart of what we do on a regular basis when it comes to DEI work, where we're constantly telling or trying to validate our existence, or that, or challenging, what is design excellence. It was completely opposite of that. It's like, well, we are design excellence. This aesthetic that expresses our culture, that affirms our existence and well-being, is valid.
Yeah, so a little bit about me is I'm from High Point, North Carolina. So I have literally watched a university destroy a Black community. And that's one of the reasons why I got into it. So when thinking about development and going into these communities, what are some tips that you could give, or what do you do when approaching projects like this?
Yeah. One, I try to stay away from projects that are displacing and destroying neighborhoods. But, when it comes to engaging people outside of the design profession, and particularly, talking about communities that have historically been marginalized and are constantly, dealing with the inherent oppressiveness of existing in the United States or any other space. I think the very first thing, and at least for me, one thing that I've been doing is really being conscious of myself. So really unlearning a lot of the oppressive design things that I've been taught, right? Or at least, being very critical of them. But, it takes a lot of work. You have to build relationships. You have to be understanding the power dynamics within these spaces, especially if this is a public or private, why is this project a thing? Doing analysis in the sense of how you look at the demographics, and not just looking at the demographics from a typical standpoint where we look at household income, education, and age, but looking at a demographics that is human-centered. So looking at how people are in the sense of their relationship to food security or violence, I think is important. But the engagement should be grounded in intention, very sensitive, engaging from multiple opportunities where you're sharing information, whether or not it's visual or through an activity, and things of that nature. So, and the process of mine that I'm doing when it comes to engagement evolves all the time, because you learn new things, situations are different. And so you try to be very conscious and sensitive to how you engage people.
Okay. So I want to talk about how you seem really joyful when you talk about engagement and celebrating voices. Can you speak on your favorite project or a project that you have done that really speaks to that?
I think, so one of my favorite projects that I've done that on is the Frederick Douglass Memorial Plaza. It was the first project where I felt the most valid, in the sense of the opportunity to bring my identity into a space, into a design, to really think about what each piece in the material means. And so everything has a meaning to it. There's a purpose for the materials, there's a purpose for the planting, there's a purpose for even the way we started the project. We were approached to we might be interested in. I'm like, this sounds kind of cool. And it's a project that is in Roxbury, which is a majority of Black neighborhood. And so, one, the location was perfect. And two, is for Frederick Douglass. Like, so how, the opportunity to like physically manifest the legacy of Frederick Douglass in a space is like unheard of, because majority of the time when it comes to, at least from my research, sculptures a lot of times, memorials a lot of times are just physical sculptures with some landscape, and there might be a little bit of detail as far as significance, but in this project we wanted to elevate that. And so the engagement was a very much intimate setting where we hosted a session at one of the oldest Black restaurants, I think, in Massachusetts, if not in New England, right? And we had a meal. So we broke bread with the community members, which, in itself starts to break down the barriers of, intimidation, but also making it more accessible. And you become more, engaged in the sense of being comfortable. We had a spoken word artist, a local spoken word artist, come in to kind of set the tone, and then in her performance, fostered a space for healing and for encouraging the community members to start to think about what the beauty meant to them in their space. In this particular neighborhood, there was gentrification happening. And then with public spaces in general, there's this inequity, right? And so what we wanted to do was find a way to convey this reclaiming of space, this, safe space, and then we even question what safe space means when we talk about safe space, and who is it talking about. But in the end, like, we wanted to have this Black aesthetics, and that Black aesthetic in this particular case, one, Black aesthetic looks different where you are. It's like Black is not monolithic. In a lot of spaces, we started to see different motifs of African-American or African textures and patterns, and warm tones of wood or bright colors. And, one of the most influential things for this particular project was the planting palette that we use was influenced by African-American gardens. And so this whole notion that African-American gardens were very much eclectic in the sense of the geometry, and the geometry and texture and colors, bold colors, bold textures, asymmetrical, because at the time, a lot of folks wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to go to a nursery. But if they liked a particular plant, they would have the opportunity to dig a plant up in their backyard in the woods, or it would be a gift from someone, and then they would nurture it for it to grow. And so in the planting palette, we take that notion and implement it in a way that also invokes memory and senses of smell, so there's like some mint and some peppermint. And there's what I call the buttercup. So like growing up in the South, you get the little white flower, little honeysuckle, right? And so like putting those things into the planting palette, and, really creating the space for it to be a place for people to celebrate, a place for people to gather and perform, but also a place for reflection and just like existing without the threat of being removed from a space. And so the project is still underway, hoping to have it constructed this year. But it's definitely one of the first projects. It is the first project that I've been able to put myself in, and I'm hoping to do more projects like that.
So Breeze, some closing thoughts, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. What are 3 goals that you could give me and other people pursuing their MLA to stick by?
So 1, be yourself. Be your most authentic self all the time. And just do that. Because I think a lot of the times we don't hear that enough, and we find ourselves in spaces where we feel like we can't be ourselves, right? So it's important. That's important, because being yourself, that leads you to the opportunity to yourself to be reflected in the work that you do. So that's one. Another is read, right? And this is something I'm working on always, but reading books, I think, are key. And it's not the only way to learn things, but learning things outside of the classroom, I think is important. And that means reading books, that are either related to landscape architecture, space building, making, but also for me personally, and for you, this might be valid, but also reading books that are culturally, like your culture, your heritage, because that influences us as well as the people that we are. And there are opportunities to take that knowledge and reflect it back into the spaces that we're in. So I would say that that's definitely an important one. And also, like, learning skill sets outside of the classroom, doing professional development programs and things like that. And that third thing, network.
Okay.
That is important. Networking is important because, you're not in landscape architecture by yourself. There are a lot of Black landscape architects out here. And, speaking of network, as a board member of the Black Landscape Architecture Network, that is a great place to be connected with other Black landscape architects. And that is a collective where you can start to, get support, learn new things, and, not be alone, not feel like you're alone in the profession.
Yeah. So like I was saying, I'm definitely going to burn those goals into my head and try to stick to it. And I'm going to email you later and get some books for me to read, because I need to work on that.
Oh yeah, I got you.
But thank you for this interview. It's been an honor talking with you, and I hope to talk to you more in the future and get to know each other. So just thank you. It means a ton to me.
Thank you so much for doing this. I remember being at, in the MLA program, and I miss it. I miss everyone there. But I know this is an important project because, we need to share what folks are doing and reconnect. And, everybody has some gems to share here and there. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And congratulations on, getting this far in the MLA program.
Thank you.
And good luck when you get out.
Yeah, I need to build my network up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Breeze. It's been a pleasure.
Always.
Bye.
Bye.